This ship was built to survive 2 flooded compartments. On the night of the 13th of January 2012, it flooded 5. Everything after that, the list, the blackout, the capsize, the 32 deaths, was not bad luck. It was arithmetic. The captain put the ship on the rocks, but the reason it rolled over and died in shallow water is a different failure entirely, and it's one the cruise industry spent the next decade quietly trying to fix. The Costa Concordia was not old, not tired, not cutting corners. She was 7 years old, 290 meters long, 114,000 gross tons, the largest cruise ship Italy had ever built when she launched. 6 diesel generators, a diesel-electric power plant, 16 watertight bulkheads. She was fully compliant with SOLAS, the international convention that governs ship survivability, and the investigation confirmed that compliance held right up to the moment of impact. That's the detail to hold on to. Nothing was broken, nothing was neglected. On paper, this was one of the safest large vessels afloat, which is exactly why what happened to her matters. At 9:10 in the evening, the Concordia left her planned course. The captain, Francesco Schettino, wanted a sail-by salute, a close pass to Giglio Island to light up the ship for the people on shore. It wasn't in the company's official procedures, but it wasn't unheard of either. Informal practices like this had crept into operations over the years, tolerated because they always ended well. She approached the island at over 15 knots, too fast for the water she was in. At 9:39, Schettino ordered a turn to swing clear of the reef. The order went to a helmsman, and in the confusion of language and timing, the helm went the wrong way first. By the report's account, it took 13 seconds to correct. A maritime expert later testified it wouldn't have mattered. By then, the collision was already unavoidable. At 9:45, the port side struck the Skoal rocks. The rock tore a gash 53 meters long down the port side, from frame 52 to frame 125, up to 7 meters wide. 2 long strips of steel were sheared clean off the hull and later found on the seabed, more than 90 meters from the ship. Below the waterline, the sea came in. And here is where the ship's fate was sealed in the first few minutes, long before anyone gave an evacuation order. Compartment number 5 flooded completely, almost instantly. Number 6 flooded rapidly right behind it. Then, progressive flooding into compartments 4, 7, and 8. 5 watertight compartments, open to the sea. Inside those 5 compartments sat almost everything that kept the ship alive. The main diesel generators, the propulsion motors, the ballast and bilge pumps. A modern cruise ship, one of the most advanced of her kind, was now a powerless steel island carrying more than 4,200 people, drifting toward a coastline she could no longer steer away from. Now let's do the part the news coverage never does. Let's ask the engineering question. Why did 5 flooded compartments kill this ship when she had 16 watertight bulkheads? The answer starts with a standard almost nobody outside the industry knows about. When the Concordia's keel was laid in 2006, the rule she had to meet, under SOLAS, was that she must survive the flooding of any 2 adjacent watertight compartments. 2. That's the damage a ship her age and type was built to absorb and stay upright. The specific damage case assumed a breach of around 11 meters. She got a breach of 53 meters, 5 compartments. The damage was more than 4 times longer than anything the design was ever required to withstand. And this is the finding that matters most, straight from the investigation. The report ran a full stability calculation and simulation, and it confirmed that the ship met the SOLAS requirement applied to her. She was compliant. But no vessel built to that standard could have survived this much damage. The report calls the flooding of 5 contiguous compartments a unique event. Damage well beyond the survivability standard that applied to her. Read that carefully, because it's the whole point of this channel. The ship did not fail because it was defective. It failed because it did exactly what the rules asked of it. And the rules asked for less than reality delivered. But surviving damage isn't just about how many compartments flood. It's about stability. And stability is where this gets lethal. A ship floats upright because of a balance between 2 points: its center of gravity, pulling down, and its center of buoyancy, pushing up. As long as the geometry between them produces a restoring force when the ship tips, what naval architects call a righting arm, the ship wants to return to upright. Flood a compartment low in the hull, and you don't just add weight. You raise the effective center of gravity, and you let water slosh across the width of the ship. The free surface effect. Both shrink the righting arm. Flood 5 compartments, and the righting arm doesn't just shrink, it runs out. Then a second mechanism took over. As those 5 compartments filled, the ship sank deeper. Her draft increased until the water level reached deck 0. And deck 0 was the deck where the watertight bulkheads stopped. That's the bulkhead deck, the top edge of the watertight boxes. Once the sea rose above it, water began spilling over the tops of the bulkheads and down an internal stairway into compartment 3. A 6th compartment flooded not through the hull, but from above, over a wall that simply wasn't tall enough anymore. 6 compartments in roughly 40 minutes. This is what naval architects call progressive flooding. And once it starts crossing the bulkhead deck, subdivision stops meaning anything. The watertight boxes are only watertight up to a line. Cross that line, and a ship with 16 bulkheads floods like a ship with none. There's one more piece of physics here, and it's almost cruelly elegant. When the power died, the rudder froze, stuck to starboard. The ship had initially listed to port, toward the breach. But with the rudder jammed and the wind pushing her, she swung, and the list crossed over to starboard. That rightward roll is why she grounded and rolled onto her starboard side near Giglio. The same drift that carried her back toward the island, the drift that, grimly, made the rescue reachable from shore, was the drift that decided which way she'd die. The list went from about 15 degrees to nearly 80. And a ship at 80 degrees is not a ship anymore. It's a wall. So if the ship was already lost the moment those 5 compartments opened, and it was, then why did 32 people die? Because losing the ship and losing lives are 2 different failures. Modern naval architecture accepts that beyond a certain damage threshold, the hull may be lost. The entire point of the safety system past that threshold is simple. The ship can die, the people cannot. That's what evacuation exists for. And that's the system that broke. The collision was at 9:45. An engineer told the bridge within minutes that multiple watertight compartments were flooding. By the report's account, officers on the bridge knew there were at least 3, then 4, compartments open to the sea. The captain knew the ship was mortally damaged. The passengers were told it was a blackout, an electrical fault, situation under control. The first general emergency alarm didn't sound until 10:33, nearly 50 minutes after impact. The order to abandon ship came at 10:54, more than an hour after the sea came in, on a ship that was already listing hard, in the dark, with a multinational crew, many of them hotel and entertainment staff, trying to launch lifeboats down the steepening side of a hull. The naval architecture gave those people a window. The command decisions on the bridge spent it. Every death in this disaster was a death by drowning, and the largest single group died after being directed toward the very side of the ship that made its final roll. The ship was killed by geometry. The people were killed by the clock. The investigation didn't stop at blaming the captain, though it did that too, and he was convicted of manslaughter. It went after the design assumptions, and the recommendations read like a list of everything that failed in slow motion. Double skin protection around the compartments holding vital propulsion and electrical equipment, so a single side breach can't drown the generators. Relocating the main switchboards above the bulkhead deck. A second emergency generator in a separate fire zone high in the ship. And a real-time link between flooding detection and the onboard stability computer, so a captain in the future would know, in the moment, exactly how much ship he had left. That last one is the tell. Here's what stood out to me reading the report. The Concordia actually carried a stability computer, voluntarily beyond what the rules required. But it was built to check her loading condition before sailing. It was never designed to calculate residual stability during flooding. So in the one situation where it could have told the bridge the truth, you have minutes, not hours, put them in the boats now, it stayed silent, because nobody had asked it to do that math in real time. The tool was on board. The question was never wired to it. That gap between the data a ship already has and the decision it needs is where this disaster lived. And it's a gap that exists on more ships than just this one. The Costa Concordia wasn't a story about an old ship or a broken ship. She was one of the most advanced vessels of her time, fully compliant, sunk by a captain's detour, and then finished off by a survivability standard that quietly assumed a breach 4 times smaller than the one she got. Every ship built after her is a little harder to kill because of what her report found. The sea didn't sink the Concordia. The rock didn't sink her either. She was sunk by the distance between what the rules required and what the ocean was actually capable of doing. And closing that distance, one accident report at a time, is the entire job. If you want the next failure taken apart the same way, subscribe. Next time, a ship that broke in half in calm water and the crack that engineers argued about for 50 years.